Does anyone know what is forging fire in the audience? I heard that mathematicians don't watch reality TV shows, so maybe no one knows what forging fire is about. But what about William Kawemba? That also might be a very tricky question. But now you are going to see very shortly why I mentioned those two items. So, and I'm going to start with the first item, which is forging fire. So forging fire, before I say anything, I'm going to show you a clip. Let's hope it plays. Okay, so so you probably no. So, I'm sorry, I lost my slides. What happened to my slides? Give me a few minutes. Oh, it's frozen. Sorry about that. I just lost my. I'm not sure what happened.
It's okay. We're pretty used to these hiccups now that after a year. Did it go to maybe if you restart your PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so I just showed you the clip, which is about, oops. So the clip is called Forging Fire. It's basically a reality TV show, which is about blacksmiths competing against each other. And so the first challenge is they have to make a knife from scratch. And then each contestant they eliminate a contestant at each stage until they get maybe 2 contestants remaining, and those 2 contestants get sent home to make a knife. And the first time I saw this show, I got hooked to the show instantly because it reminded me of my childhood, basically. So the picture that you see on the right it's the typical traditional forge in Mali. So this is a picture of a forge in Mali. So it's,
sorry, Lassina, we can't see your screen.
Oh,
I think you turned off the sharing.
Yeah, I forgot to share it. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So awesome, I was saying the reason why I got hooked to this show is because it kind of brought me back to my childhood, because it reminded me of my childhood. So what you see on this picture is a traditional forge in Mali. And you see this guy beating the iron on the handles. So, and you see this kid right in the back there. So what you probably don't see is that there's another kid who is hiding behind this mound, who is working really hard to fan this flame. And probably you would see what I mean in the next picture, because this forge looked more like the forge in which I grew up. Right, so you can see the kids sitting not too far from this fire, and is flaming this fire by you see he has to pedal this thing all day long, fanning this flame. So it's quite tiring, and I'm actually sure that the only reason he's laughing in this picture is that there's someone in the camera taking his picture. That's why he's laughing. So but anyway, this show reminded me of my childhood, and so basically, let me tell you briefly that in the West African, there is a caste system which is based on trade. So the castes are organized by trade, and so I'm from what is called the Numu caste, which is Numu in Malenke or Bambara mean blacksmith. So I'm from the blacksmith caste, and in the Senufo language, you also say Fono, it's the same thing. And so what that basically means is that by birth, I was destined to be a Numu, which means I would have been doing all that Numu thing all my life, until I was about 9 months old. And so when I got 9, I got polio, the polio virus. And that meant that I couldn't do any kind of physical activities. But even then, my dad didn't want to send me to school because I was basically his only son, and I was the oldest at the time. So he didn't want to send me to school. So, so that's kind of the reason why I mentioned William, the Forge and Fire, that I was basically forged in fire because of this connection with the blacksmith caste. And one more connection with that Forge and Fire theme was that when I was in high school, during the summertime, I would spend time at the forge. So one way for me to earn money was to make knives, and then I'll sell them at the local market. And the process is actually very similar to what you see in this reality TV show, except that they have a much more modern equipment, which I didn't have when I was growing up. So this is actually someone making a traditional knife. There is still a very long process before this is finished. But usually if it's someone who is really good at it, then at the end, it's a very beautiful knife that you get. So this is the Forge and Fire connection, and I'm probably going to get back to this a bit later. But what about the William Kawemba connection? So William Kawemba, as I said, he became famous, and there's a book about him which is titled "The Boy Who Harvests the Wind." And the reason why the book is titled that, so this is William Kawemba. He was, I think he was a boy at the time, but now he's no longer a boy. I think he's maybe 33 now. So the reason why he's called the boy who harvests the wind is because of this windmill that you see in the picture. So he basically took metal scrap from, dumpsters, and then he built his own windmill to collect energy for his family home. And so this, so when he did, so basically to tell you a bit about his story, he dropped out of school because his parents couldn't afford to pay it. But he wanted to keep his education. So what he did, he would go to the local library and read through books. And then eventually came through a picture of a windmill, and he decided he was going to build his own windmill. And so the windmill picture became viral, the one that I just showed you. And to the point that he got invited to give a talk at TED. And he actually later, he even got invited to do a degree at Dartmouth. I think he did it via long distance education or something like that. So again, so what I want to say is that as a kid, I was as curious as William Kawemba, as one would say. And I was extremely passionate about science. But unfortunately, it was always very frustrating because of the lack of resources. For example, what would happen when I was in high school, for example, when I got my new chemistry or physics book, I would read through them from cover to cover before we even start class. But then there would be nothing left to do. I couldn't do the experiment. Even at the school, we usually didn't always have the material to do the experiment. And so you spend the year being frustrated because you basically cannot find the appropriate way to cultivate your passion. And so when I saw all that story about William Kawemba, it kind of reminded me of this childhood. Right? So I'm going to tell you a bit more about some other connection to William Kawemba. But one of the things that so just to tell you a bit about my experience growing up, one anecdote that I like to tell to people is this, that I titled it the God Saver or the Newton experiment on dispersion of light. And you are going to see. So I'm sure that most of you grew up taking for granted what the Newton dispersion of light is. I mean, it's a very simple phenomenon that you can explain to people. And the first time I read about this experiment, I decided it was one of the few experiments that I could do at home. So I decided that I was going to perform this experiment. So then, as I was busy putting my experiment together, my mom, who was always curious about everything I was doing, especially when it was science related, because she kind of always feared for the worst, so she couldn't resist, and she asked me what I was doing. So I told her that I was going to create, I mean, the thing is, usually I knew the kind of thing that I needed to say to my mom to get a certain reaction. But in this case, I really didn't. So I didn't have the vocabulary to explain this experiment to her. So I told her I was going to create a God Saver. And the word God Saver is the word, I mean, God Saver is the word for rainbow in Malinke and Sonofo. So you could see her face when she repeated anxiously, "You want to make a God Saver?" At which point I burst into laughing and I said, "Yes, Mom, I want to create a God Saver." I mean, we jiggled about the experience, the experiment, and I mean, I think it's an hilarious story, and you have to understand where my mom comes from, and it's also kind of illustrate the kind of challenge that I had growing up, because I mean, my mom was from a small village. No one ever explained to her what this physics phenomenon is, to have a rainbow in the sky, and she grew up calling it God Saver, God Saver. So, but of course, after I did this experiment and she realized what the phenomenon was, of course, she understood then that there was nothing special behind a rainbow. So I like to tell this anecdote because it also kind of illustrates one aspect of my mom that I like, that she knew how to laugh about herself. She was very self-deprecating, but yeah. So, and this experiment kind of remind me back in 2008 when people start talking about the Hadron Collider and people feared that it was the end of the world. I mean, my mom didn't react that drastically, but at least it did remind me of this experiment. So this is briefly to tell you, I mean, I said William Kawemba. So this is telling you how I think I have a story which kind of cross path or is related in some ways to the one for William Kawemba. At least in his case, I would say his story was kind of, as I said, success story, and mine is still continuing, and I'm hoping it will be a successful one as his. But so what I'm going to do next, I'm going to explain to you the way I think mentorship changed my life trajectory. So that's what I'm going to tell you next. And so I'm going to start by saying that the three people who had the most impact on my life trajectory are these three people that are on the slide now. So the first one is Mr. Kone. The second one is called Madame Françoise Denis, and the third one is Monsieur Jacques Rech. That's how I used to call them, and I still call them this way. And before I tell you about those people, I'm going to give you a crash course on West African culture. Maybe I should say Ivorian culture, because to be less pretentious. So does anyone know the cereal in the picture now? So the cereal in the picture is called millet. So it's one of the cereal that is grown in West Africa. You see, it's very green now on the right picture. Even when it's dried out, it stays a bit greenish. And maybe I'm biased when I say this, but one of the best porridge you can make is with the mille grain. Actually, the first time I went to Barcelona, I tasted this drink that is called horchata. And it reminded me of a drink that is made with the mille grain. But I later realized that the horchata is made with tiger nut grains, which also tastes a bit similar to mille, but not quite. The second cereal that I'm going to tell you is called the sorgo. You see on the right picture, it's reddish. Usually when it's still on the farm, it can be really bright red, and it's really, really beautiful to see this bright red together with the green on the farm. And when it's harvested, you get the picture on the left, and then when you remove the skin, you get those grains that are completely white. And again, people make all kind of things with those sorghum. The other cereal that I'm going to tell you about is called fonio. There's actually no good reason for me to tell you about fonio other than just it's related to the other two that I'm going to tell you in a minute. So you see, the fonio is a very peculiar cereal. So the plant doesn't look anything special, but look at in the hand of this guy. You see, it's almost look like it's sand, right? You cannot distinguish the fonio from the sand when you see it like this. But you see, when you remove the skin, it has this color in the lower picture. And I recently discovered that the fonio is actually a superfood. So now you can actually find it as fonio in some supermarket in the US. I don't know yet about Canada, but you can find the fonio in quite a few supermarket in the US. So the reason why I'm telling you, I said it would be a crash course in the tradition. So here, this is why I'm telling you about those cereals. So traditional beer is brewed with these two cereals that I showed you at the beginning, the mille and the sorgo. And because of this rigid caste system that we had in West Africa, brewing beer was also reserved to the women from the Numu caste. And this was a way for them to earn an income. And this traditional beer is called Dolo in Malenke, and it's called Sim in Senufo. And so usually my mom and some of the other, because we were living in a big compound, so there were several women brewing the beer and different days of the week and sell it. And so I said except for the palm wine, which is, as you can see, it was more tricky to make palm wine because you have to climb through a tree which is rather tall, like this guy is doing. But so as I said, there were several women in the compound where I was living who would brew the beer and then they would sell it. And so when I say Kone, I mentioned Kone as one of the person who was very influential in my life. I would say exactly the first mentor that I had. I consider him as the first mentor that I had, because if it weren't for him, I would not have gone to school. I mean, it's that simple. And so the reason why I told you about Kone is that he came into my life, I would say, at the right moment. And so I guess I have to say I was very lucky in some sense. So he was the headmaster at a local school in Tengrela, where I grew up. And then he would come to our home to drink this traditional beer with his friends. And so since the first day he saw me, he kept begging my dad that my dad should send me to school. And my dad was, of course, very resistant, but somehow he ended up accepting to send me at school. But to be honest, I actually don't remember a lot of this conversation because I was probably 4 or 5. So most of this recollection come from the thing that my mom told me. But at least when I was old enough, when I started going to elementary school and then I started high school, I could see how Kone was kind of he was always keeping track of my progress at school. And so I'll always be kind of very grateful to him because he basically certainly gave my life a different trajectory. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you about mentorship. So the two people that I mentioned also were Madame Denise and Monsieur Jacques Resch. Those are two people that I encountered in college, which is high school in French, and lycée, which is college in English. So I'm going to tell you how those people have impacted my life. And then, so first of all, I want to say that my college was in a city which is called Tengrela, and Tengrela is at 5 kilometers of the Mali border. And then my high school, the college, was the Lycée Moderne de Korogo, which is a city which is about 600 kilometers from the main city of Abidjan and 200 kilometers south of Tengrela. So yeah, so those are the places where I went to high school and college. And so Madame Denise was my physics teacher in high school. She was a French expat. And Monsieur Jacques Resch, as I used to call him, was my physics teacher in college, which is the lycée. And he was also a French expat. And I mean, so I could spend really hours telling to you about how those people impacted my life. But I mean, I really want to say that they were the one that nurtured my passion for science. But they did it in really, really difficult circumstances because, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, usually there are no resources, right? So, I mean, even if they wanted to help me, because the resources weren't just there, I mean, it was very challenging at times. But they did the best they could under very difficult circumstances. And I would always be, again, grateful to those people. And I said the three people that had the most impact in my life, but there are many other people that I could have mentioned to you when I talked about having some mentors or people who have, for example, I could tell you about my math teacher at my first year of high school. He was from Guinea, he wasn't from the Ivory Coast. In my third year, my math teacher was from Tunisia. And my first year in the lycée, my math teacher was a French national who came to France as a Cambodian refugee. And in my third year in the lycée, my teacher was a French nun called Madame Tardivon. So basically, so you see those people, they are from different nationalities. They have different backgrounds. And for me, each of them had a very positive impact on my life. So when I think about mentorship, I don't think about race. I don't think about culture. I think about human connection because that's how those people that I only mentioned few of them who had positive impact on my life. And for me, it's important to make that distinction. So when I said those people did the best that they could to help me, I'm going to tell you a bit more about Jacques Resch now. So as I said, I had some connection with William Kawemba, who built his windmill by getting scrap metal around dumpster. And I was doing pretty much the same like him, really. I was going around town and then I was collecting old radios, and then I would harvest the electronic component of those radios to build my own stuff. And I still remember all the excitement that I had when I received the proper electronic toolbox from Jacques Resch. So this toolbox, he got it from one of his fellow experts who was heading back to France. He was also very passionate about electronics, so he had this sophisticated toolbox, and he gave it to me. And so for the first time, I could build my own electronic gadget and kit. And so I was very excited, and I still remember this today to how this was impactful on my life. So just to tell you, I mean, you might be curious, how did I get around collecting those radios and taking the component? This is a picture of a tricycle. This is typically the kind of thing that some people would, disabled people get around in Africa. So usually the normal wheelchair doesn't work, because actually if you have a normal wheelchair, in some street it might be too muddy, so you'd get just stuck. So, and yeah, so this is how I got around to the dumpster to collect the radio component and then build my own stuff. Just a small parenthesis. So maybe some of you know about Mr. Jacques Resch, or you actually don't know about him, but he's actually known for other reason than the fact that he was my physics teacher. He's actually a great painter. So here are some of his painting. I think this is called The Fish. And this is another of his painting. So all of those painting, I actually saw him doing this when I was. Sorry? I saw him making some of this painting when I was in the lycée. So if you ever buy one of those painting and you want someone to authenticate them, I think I have enough expertise to do this. I'm kidding, but I do know that he signed his painting in a very special way. So I think I might actually be able to say if someone did copy one of those signatures. So, so this is the last painting that I want to show you from Mr. Jacques Resch. So yeah, so I just basically told you about my life experience growing up and how those different people have impacted my life or changed my life trajectory. And so it's fair to say that there are big differences between my life experience growing up in the African savannah and that of a kid growing up in Canada or the US. But I think it's still fair to say that there are some common denominators, right, when it comes to underrepresentation in science and mathematics. Because I did talk to a lot of students from those backgrounds. I talked to many of them, and it's very common to hear many of those students tell you, yeah, I'm the first generation from my family to go to university. So like I'm the first generation from my family to go to school or to go to university. So there are common denominators, even though I grew up quite far away from Canada or US. So basically what I want you to take away from this talk is the following few facts that I want to say. I certainly wasn't the brightest kid in my class. I have to say that. I wasn't the brightest kid in my class. But all things considered, I think I was one of the luckiest, right? Because I think I had several people who came into my life at the right time, and they had a very positive impact on my life. So that's the first thing that I want you to take away from this talk. And the second thing that I want you to take away from this talk is that don't stay on the sideline and feed stereotype or be fed stereotype. You see, because talking to many of those students, I mean, many of them get told, you belong to sport, let's say basketball, football, or tennis, you don't belong to science. And I think this is something we should always be very careful about saying to someone who show that they are interested in science. So I want to say, be the Mr. Kone, the Madame Denise, or the Monsieur Resch of some kids around you, if you can. So that's the thing that I want to say. And when I was doing my research to talk about mentorship, I actually scoured social media to actually talk to several people and get their opinion. And I came across a recent article that was written by Chanda Prescott Weinstein, who is a physics professor in New Hampshire. And she was talking about all that the struggle that she had just being a physicist, not being constantly reminded that she has to talk about things that are not related to her work as a physicist. And she had this quote saying that, I have had to write not just stories of the cosmos I love, but also about how we are cut off from them by white supremacy. I'm supposed to accept that I will not get to just write about science I love, that I will have to be more than a theoretical physicist always, and that will also mean my work as a theoretical physicist is obscured. So it's a very strong testimony, and if you get a chance to read this this piece, you should do it. You learn a lot from reading it. So one thing that I want to mention before finishing this talk is related to a visit that Einstein did at the Lincoln University. So I don't know how many of you know Julian Bond, but he was the president of the NCAAP back in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, sorry, and so he had this quote. He said, "My family law has Einstein telling me, don't remember anything that is already written down." So he said that his parent told him, Einstein told him never to remember anything written down. And he said that, so he doesn't remember Einstein telling him that, but it's an advice that he followed all his life. So he met Einstein when he was about 4. So this is Julian Bond, and it's in this picture. I guess the left one is when he was about 4 or 5 when he met Einstein. And the right one is he was a bit older. So the reason why Julian Bond and Einstein met is the picture that you see now. So this is Julian Bond died, who was the president of Lincoln University at the time. So the picture is dated 1946. So this is what they call in the US historically Black colleges and university, HBCU. So Lincoln was one of those universities in Pennsylvania. And so this is Einstein receiving an honorary degree from the university. And before you receive the degree, this is him talking to a student at that university. And the reason why I'm showing you this picture is I actually think that this, the first time I saw this picture, I thought that the importance of this picture was actually underestimated, because you have to understand that this picture is in 1946, when segregation was still very present in the US. And so I think the picture was the importance is underestimated. And for example, at the time when Einstein was receiving this honorary degree, if you attended a conference of the American Mathematical Society, you weren't allowed to stay in the same hotel as the other attendees that were at the conference. And at the same time, you had this guy called David Blackwell, who became a prominent probabilist at Berkeley University. At the time, he was a postdoc at the Institute in Princeton. And the Princeton University didn't want the professor at the Princeton University didn't want professor at the university to collaborate with this guy simply because the guy was Black. So that's why I think that this picture, the importance of this picture was kind of underestimated. Because let's think about it. If you think about it, many American scientific institutions, they pride themselves in keeping alive many Einstein traditions. So let's just simply imagine what could have happened if they kept this one tradition alive. I mean, let's say since 1946, they were sending physics Nobel laureate to visit one of those historically Black college university institutions. I mean, who knows what kind of impact that could have had on those students? So that's why I showed you that the picture. And one of the things that I did, as I said earlier, was that to talk to many people on social media to get their opinion to help me prepare for this talk. And I talked to several young people, and one of those young person that I talked about, his name is Olumide. He's an American. I think he has a Nigerian background by the name. And so I asked, and this is what he says about mentorship and how it was important in his life. So he said, as far as I'm aware, the skills necessary to become a scientist aren't particularly rare, just often underdeveloped. The issue then becomes calling attention to those skills and nurturing them to an effective level. I believe my mentor have been and continue to be pivotal in helping me develop those skills. So he's actually a very bright young man, and I mean, I could talk to you over and over about all the exchange that we have, but this gives you some ideas. And so I came around several of them who clearly show that having a mentor who kind of guided them, probably they didn't have, because they didn't have a parent who had any kind of background in science, was very helpful to them. And I think it's the same experience that I also had. If I didn't have Mr. Jacques Resch, Madame Denis, or Mr. Kone in my life, I mean, I think I would have probably chosen a different path. So what I want to do to conclude this talk is that, yes, I know that many minorities are seriously underrepresented in science and mathematics. So I lived in Canada for a very long time. I know that's the case. I know that's the case in Europe. I also know that this is the case, the same in the US. And the argument that people would often make about this is that, yeah, if you had maybe some role model from those communities, the situation would be very different. So, but what I want to say is let's turn around that argument for 1 minute. So if we turn that argument for a minute, we could say, maybe if we make science and mathematics more inclusive, the situation would be dramatically different, right? So I do believe that from my personal experience, I believe that we need to reinvent the role of a mentor. I think the notion of role models should be more inclusive than and go beyond race. Because as I told you, the people that have some impact on my life, I mean, they were from different backgrounds. So two of my mentors, as I mentioned, they were French nationals. The first mentor that I mentioned was an Ivorian. But as I told you, I met several people who have a big impact on my life from different backgrounds, from Cambodia, from Tunisia, from Lebanon. And so when I talk about role model, I almost never see race when I talk about role model. So that's why I think we should really take that word out of this issue of underrepresentation, and maybe find different way to bring other people to science and mathematics. So what I really hope to achieve from this talk is that it gives an opportunity to open a discussion about this topic. So as I said, I was not going to talk to you about on this topic as some giving you any statistic or someone who has an expertise, but to talk to you about my life experience. And I hope that you did get the right lesson from my talk today. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Lassina. That was very, very interesting, and it gave us a lot to think about. I am going to, I see that a lot of people are applauding, if you can see that. I'm going to I'm going to let the discussions begin. If you have any questions, you can ask them. You can open your mic, ask them here, or write in the chat. While I'm waiting for, so you know how to raise your hand here. I'm looking at the list, and while I'm waiting for that, actually, let me see if I see any hands. I have a question for you, Lassina, while people are sort of organizing their thoughts. You said at the end of your talk, you basically said sometimes you put too much emphasis on, the mentorship from the community, and rather than putting emphasis there, if we make math and sciences more inclusive. So when you say are you talking about basically the material conditions of, do you want to maybe expand on that, and while you're waiting for a question?
Yeah, so when I say more inclusive, for example, as I said, for me, every time I think about mentor, I never think about, okay, I want the person I want to be a role model for me, I want them to be black or white or some. I never think about that. For me, it's someone that I admire for the thing that they achieve and for what I want to do. And so I think we need to remove that barrier and be open-minded in that sense. So for example, I would like to see someone who didn't grow up in certain neighborhood in Canada to go in one of those schools that is predominantly a minority and talk to them about what they do as a mathematician, right? And maybe you can convince one person in the room to explore that avenue, right? But if you assume that because I'm white and maybe the people in this school, they are all black, if I talk to them about mathematics, they won't be interested. I think that's the wrong approach.
Okay, yeah, I see, thank you.
Yeah.
Peter also wrote, I could mention cooperation in math education and women teachers and how they changed the way I understood mathematics studies.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Did you want to talk more, say more about that, Peter? Or?
Yeah, I'll just mention that I grew up in a university family, so it was expected that I go to university, but I didn't have role models in the math department. You might have role models for musician or comedian. Like growing up here, we would see people on TV. So it was difficult to settle down and study math. But then when I went to Carleton University, they were talking about cooperative. It was no longer an individual effort, but all the students would work together. And I became a teaching assistant there and passed this on, that you could all work together on your homework, but submit your own answers. I'm working in mathematics now in Statistics Canada. We all work together. We have different team members. We work together. And because it's the federal government, there's a lot of diversity around race, gender, ethnicity, stuff like this. This is enforced through the laws. So I'm lucky that way that I have a diverse workplace now. I think universities have always been a bit diverse, but I understand there's underrepresentation. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I do agree. So yes, so if you don't have it, and I kind of relate to some of the issue that Peter just described. So if you, for me, I wanted to do something in science, but not having parents with the right background, it's really hard to settle on what you want to do. And that's why it's so crucial that you be able to find someone who actually say, okay, maybe the life choice that you want to make, it's actually not wrong. So I want to be able, let me try and guide you through this. And I think that's what many of those people did for me. And they did it at a time when it was very crucial. And that's why I find it so important. And I didn't care whether they were Ivorian, they were from France, they were from Cambodia, Egypt, because I did have professors from all of those backgrounds, and all of them, they have some impact on my life. So yeah, I see Ila as a hand. Yes, Ila.
So I'm a professor at University of Toronto, and our math department has about, I think, thousands of students in the classes. And so one of the things I see as a problem in terms of the inclusivity you were talking about on the last side is that a lot of our programs are meant to a lot of our first year classes, excuse me, are meant to gatekeep and sort of go absolutely against like a notion of inclusivity as far as like I understand it. And so when I go to the high schools in the GTA area and when I talk to students from high schools that are not, I mean, similar to the high schools I went to in the US, I always have this feeling of I'm bringing you into a place that might not treat you well, but might not have this mentorship, doesn't have the capacity for mentorship of thousands of students. And so I don't know what, I went to a very small undergraduate, so I don't know how to help students navigate that. They can't all come to me, but I can certainly help as many as I can.
Yeah, so I do see the issue with, I mean, ideally, I want some of that mentorship to actually start earlier. That's one thing that I want to do. I would like to be able one day to actually start visiting those students at high school level and be able to actually, because I think that's probably where we have to start, right? So then it give them time to be prepared to actually come to I mean, they'll come more prepared to university if we can reach out to them at an earlier stage in the development. So ideally, this is what I want to do. But yeah, I do understand that. Yes, that's a challenge. But again, I think maybe sometimes just listening to those people and being able to detect their weaknesses, I think sometimes it might still be able to help them. I mean, so maybe, but maybe I'm too idealistic kind of. I mean, I don't know.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Adrian. Adrian, you have a question.
Yeah, idea, building on that idea, I sort of like to think about speaking as an undergrad student is the idea that when you have undergrad students together who are all passionate about similar things, they sort of become each other's mentors and push each other.
That's true. Yeah. No, that's true.
For
because
me,
yeah, that's actually true, because actually some of the students that I talked to when I was preparing my this talk, they did mention that point. So you could see that many of them, they were going through this training together and they kind of form a supportive network to, and I think that, yes, that can help too, yes. Any other questions? Any other questions?
Habiba?
Hi, bonjour Lassina.
Bonjour.
Yeah, I have a question regarding maybe mentorship, but not only at school level where it should start, but all along the way. So it is something, basically what I'm trying to say is that you describe when people open first doors for you and give you the means to engage, in science. But then how did it continue afterwards? Did you feel like you had more mentors along the way? But why I'm asking this question, what I find, I'm from a smaller school, okay? University of Lethbridge, small undergrad. It's primarily undergrad. So I have in the opposite to Ila, I have more direct access to undergrad students. So I am more in a privileged position with that regard. I can interact with them, but then you open doors for them, but then what is afterwards? Is it what I mean? Like after they get a degree, if they enter, let's say, academia, since I guess that's a graal here, but where do you release them? I'm trying to say mentorship all along the way, when you continue in your career.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I guess at different stage, maybe it would be certainly. I would personally, I would think that the mentorship when you still like acquiring background and making a career choice is important. But maybe at a later stage, I assume that the person might have acquired a certain independence at least, because at least you hope that mentorship would lead to that point. But for me, it's So when you said so when I left the Ivory Coast and started in Canada, yes, I did had to adjust again. So it was a struggle because I was getting into a different educational system. And quite frankly, I didn't always have the right people to give me the right advice. So it did take me much longer to adjust to a different system, right? And for me, that's also one important part that I want to have, to be able to actually use my experience during that transition period to actually assist other people who might find themselves in similar background, which I actually did to some degree because I was involved with the ICTP. It's one institute. Maybe you know it's called the Institute of Theoretical Physics. They have a math section, yes. So they have this program to help students from developing countries to transition to graduate studies in Europe and the US and Canada. And so for a while I was involved in some kind of mentorship in helping them transition based on my experience when I first arrived in Canada. So yes, yes, I think so where do you stop when mentorship? Yeah, I know it's a tricky question, but I guess I guess also if you do get the right mentorship, you should be able to acquire a certain degree of independence and freedom, at least I hope at some point. I don't know. I mean, it's good that we're having this discussion, right? Because I don't think any one of us has the right answer, but maybe by exchanging ideas, I think we might come up with a solution which is, acceptable, I guess. It might be helpful. Any other?
I'm just going to, as Smita mentioned, that for those who might not know, there's a mentor network through the AWM, Association for Women in Mathematics, that might be great to pass on. So the link is in the chat. And also, Ela mentioned, for moving from undergraduate to graduate, consider this peer networking program. Are there any other questions? Because since we're all here and we're talking about, some of us are mentors, some of us are interested in mentoring. Maybe if you feel comfortable, Ela, when you said there's a gatekeeping function in first year, and I imagine it's not only mathematics in the field that I'm in, it might even be stronger, but maybe you can just tell us, because some, we're talking about, the other person talked about these undergrad sort of mentorships, but maybe some of us are not quite aware that some things might work as gatekeepers, Are you comfortable sort of like mentioning some of those that,
I mean, I don't know if I understand it very well, but I can tell you what my perspective, having been at Toronto now for only 2 years as research faculty. So, but I think my impression is that our specialist program for mathematics, as well as physics, computer science, and various other programs that use mathematics as some of their first year courses, use the grades in our courses to indicate who is allowed to do what. And so this causes the students to become very competitive with each other, because they know that their grades are a ranking system, and they know that if they want to do what they want to do, then they have to beat other people to it. It's a race, right? And so to me, that like breaks down inclusivity in two different levels. One is that I don't know if the grades in these classes that are not so like growth mindset in terms of learning, you know, they're very fixed mindset, like you already know calculus if you've come in and now we're testing it like on you. It's like, it seems very implicitly talent oriented. I think those things, in addition to the fact that everyone's trying to be in these very popular majors that have these limits, are the two things that end up, what I see affecting very disproportionately our underrepresented students, because they're in this environment that really, I think we all know that mathematics is done communally. But somehow that's not part of the first year program, at least at our undergraduate. And so at Toronto, we've just started a program called Pursue STEM, which has 10th graders from the Black 10th graders from the GTA area come in and meet professors from all the different inquiry-based sciences and things like that. But while we were running this, Math Day was like last week, while we were running this, it did occur to us that like, how do we prepare them for this first year program? If we're recruiting them to be in our first year program, what support do they have? What mentorship do they have for this first year program? And we're connected to these students, so that we have that connection, and there's only 40 students, but there are thousands of students that are not coming to us through this mechanism. And the Toronto, if we're talking just specifically about GTA, the Toronto curriculum for calculus and the first year curriculum for calculus do not seem connected. And I don't know who's thinking about these things.
No, that's, yes, I understand now. Yeah, go ahead, Lassina.
No, I mean, it's really a challenging issue, right? And that's why I mentioned earlier that for me, I mean, I see this as kind of a long-term solution, right? Because you really want to be able to start on an earlier stage, right? Because so those issues that pop up, I mean, probably if those students that had like the right background from high school, that would not have happened at university level, right? So some of those issues, I do see them as kind of really long-term issue if you want to solve them. I mean, it won't be something overnight, that's for sure.
Absolutely, I completely agree. But I don't, in some sense, I'm doing things a little bit here and there, and I don't know if I know what thing they're headed towards, you know? This seems like a forum to discuss such long-term strategies, where we're headed.
Yeah, I guess.
Are there any other questions? I'm just going to say that this is recorded, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, and I'll send an email to all attendees with the recording of this too. And I think it's fair to say that this gave us so much to think about, and to think about mentorship, that's what that can do, what that entails, you know, and how important it is, and it could be in the trajectory of students. And I mean, who knows, maybe we should have another webinar on mentorship to discuss this more. And if we're talking about inclusion, that's, maybe it starts there, you know. Thank you so much, Lassina. This was a great talk. And thank you everyone for being here, for participating in the discussion. And I hope to see, I see everyone applauding, and I hope to see you in the other webinars too. And I hope we can, if you want to give a talk, please.
Yeah, I would definitely. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening to me. It was a great pleasure.
All right. Thank you everyone. Stay well.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. That was great.